Theosophical Research Society, an institution founded by Manly P. Hall to explore, compare, and contrast the various wisdoms and worldviews of this mysterious place called existence. As such, we have a ton of stuff going on, more than I could talk about here, but in a nutshell, here's a few things. We have a new online class coming out this Friday, The Basic Keys to the Secret Teachings of All Ages, an online class that simplifies and expands on the main ideas of the big book, the book that built this place, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. The aim of the class is to make the text easy and digestible. That's online, starts this Friday. Next Wednesday, we have Freemasonry, Opening the Door, a presentation by Michael Samuel. Michael Samuel, is that right? Yeah. That will explore this profound fraternity and address the weird misconceptions that are floating around about it. That's next week, here, February 22nd at 7 p.m. And also newsworthy, just hitting our bookstore and online is what brought us here today, which is the 2023 reprinting of the Knapp-Hall Tarot deck. It's a faithful reproduction of the very first edition, and personally speaking, it's my favorite, and it's absolutely probably in the top 2 of the most educational symbolic decks, as in you look at the card and go, what does that mean? And as you research it, you're going to learn the meatiest, most robust ideas of esoteric philosophy. And speaking of which, speaking of tarot, let me introduce our wonderful guest. Dr. Stephan Hoeller was Manly P. Hall's fellow lecturer for over 20 years. He's a noted scholar on Gnosticism, Jungian ideas, and several branches of esoteric philosophies. Not only has he written several books on philosophy, psychology, and mystic explorations, he is also the president of the Besant Lodge of the Theosophical Society, Hollywood, where he lectures every Friday at 8 p.m. He speaks here often, and it's always a great treat to have you here. So without further ado, Dr. Stephan Hoeller. Thank
you. It is certainly a treat for me too, and it brings back many great and present memories from the blessed times when Mr. Manly Palmer Hall was still with us. And there is a particularly strong convergence in this occasion, because when the second edition of the Knapp-Hall Tarot deck was published, somewhat with my assistance, because I instigated Mr. Hall, said, Mr. Hall, everybody is publishing Tarot deck, and you have such a nice one, you've got to be publishing somehow. And so then he went over and did it. And then with what we did, something similar to this, we have projected all the cards, all the 78 cards of the deck onto the wall. And I think it took us 2 evenings to discuss them. So that was quite a glorious occasion. And the other thing that brings things to memory is that I have a somewhat altered voice today, as some of you who have heard me a lot might notice. And it is not because I'm being possessed by an entity of some sort, but because about three weeks ago I had a strong cold, and it somewhat affected my vocal cords, and so my voice is a little bit altered, hopefully temporarily. That in turn brings up yet another memory. I probably never get around to the Tarot deck, is that Mr. Hall, one New Year's lecture, because after New Year's he usually gave 2, sometimes 3 lectures on the signs of the zodiac for everybody and for the nation and for the world. And so he came out, he sat here, and he said, this year a good many people throughout the world are going to have cold. They're going to come down with a cold. And then he looked up and he said, and I've got it. So, it was a time when he owned up to the reliability of his own. In any event, what we need to address ourselves to this evening is a multifaceted subject, and our time, as always, is limited. So we will have to be selective about what elements of the tarot and of this particular tarot we will address ourselves to. First, maybe a little bit of the history of the Knapp-Hall deck itself. Back in the 1920s and the 1930s, when Theosophical Society began its work, there was a little mini revival of interest in tarot. There was really only one tarot deck around. I wasn't around myself, but I'm not a tarot deck. So that's supposed to be funny. And that was the so-called Rider deck, because it was published by Rider and Company, also known as the Weight deck. It's a good deck as far as its artistry is concerned. Pamela Coleman Smith, who was a young English disciple of Arthur Edward Waite, the great esoteric scholar, had executed it. But considering the various circumstances, the artistry was fine, but it had many other defects. So if anybody wanted a tarot deck at that time, that's pretty much the only one that they might have been able to procure with some difficulty. So Mr. Hall and I were up in his office, and I kept telling him, Mr. Hall, now they are well. He said that was a little bit how it was when we published the Knapp-Hall deck. I said, that deck is so unique that irrespective of how many other tarot decks there may be on the market, that will undoubtedly arrest some considerable attention. So he said, all right, you got it, and then we published the second edition. Now then, there was, as you may have learned, some of you, there was a very fine and very well-informed artist in Southern California, whose name was J. Augustus Knapp. And the Knapp being a German name, it's really Knapp, K-N-A-P-P, but that's too difficult for Americans to pronounce. J. Augustus Knapp was an early friend, associate of Manly Hall, and he was asked by Mr. Hall, among other things, to design and paint the large plates in what we were used to refer to as the Big Book, namely, I won't repeat the long title, but I think it has been abbreviated to the wisdom of all ages. The big pictures, the originals, were executed by J. Augustus Knapp. And he was a very fine artist and also a good esoteric student. I had a little bit of contact with him late in his life, because he lived in Laguna Beach. And so I met him in Laguna Beach at the church that I was associated with, and we had some very nice conversations. He was a splendid gentleman and a fabulous artist. So Mr. Hall selected him at that early time to design the tarot deck. And it was under his direction, and Mr. Hall looked over the artwork, but Knapp was quite well informed himself, so their cooperation was not only an aesthetic one, but it was a meeting of spirits with a common interest and a common dedication, and that sort of thing one doesn't find very often. So I think that when you avail yourself in some fashion or the other of the Knapp-Hall deck, you will be cognizant of that fact, that there seems to be a lot of not only dedication, but a lot of common insight and information that is embodied in it. And I discussed the circumstances of the artwork in the Knapp-Hall deck with Mr. Hall also, and he seemed to indicate in his subtle way that what he was hoping to accomplish, obviously with the work of J. Augustus Knapp, was that this deck would become particularly evocative of certain intuitions and certain spiritual insights, and not go according to a formula. Now, he was a very polite gentleman, as you know, and he didn't like to say anything even slightly derogatory about anybody, Manly Hall, really. He was the kindest and the most polite gentleman that I ever met, without a doubt. In any event, he was a little bit critical of the weight or the weight deck, because he felt that it, along with some other decks that were developing, and now they are all over the place, was too conscious of some system within which the tarot cards can find their place. And that system was primarily Kabbalistic. But you know, if you know some Kabbalah, you know the Kabbalistic symbolism, and you pick up one deck of cards after the other, they are of all some variety of Kabbalistic symbolism, you might get a bit tired of it. So Mr. Hall wanted to bring forth with Mr. Knapp something that was different, and that would be evocative of the transcendental imagination of the individuals who study the cards, rather than to conform in some artistic fashion. And some of the artistry in some of the tarot decks that is out, I would say, is pretty poor. Unlike this one, but that unlike they would conform to some formula, and you need to keep that in mind. In other words, don't just watch the cards when you have them available, but also allow certain insights and information to rise within you in response to the stimuli of the cards, and that the cards exert on you. Because our human minds are formulaic. In many ways, it's a trouble with the world, because people latch on to an ideology and then they hang on to it for dear life, and meanwhile they create a lot of unpleasant things in the world. And so formulaic thinking is never good thinking, very largely because it is not individual. And this is something that needs to be kept in mind regarding the Tao, because what is really important with the Tao are not the cards, but the insight and the wisdom that may arise within you, perhaps in response to or stimulated by the cards. And that was, and I can attest to that by his own words that I heard, that was Mr. Manley Hall's intention with this particular Tao deck. Now, that's sort of the history in short of this Tao deck. Now, there needs to be a little bit of background to Tao in general, although I strongly suspect that there are many among you who are fairly familiar with the background of the Tao historically in the world, things of that sort, and who don't require this little historical reboot. Now, what in general, prior to the 18th century, practically no one knew anything about the Tao. Now it is possible that there were versions of a deck of cards which were related to the Tao, let us say, and out of which the Tao cards later on developed, which were circulating but primarily for fortune-telling purposes, and as Papius pointed out, they became the commodity that was carried around Europe, subsequently probably in the world, by the gypsies. And so, strictly fortune-telling. But of course, then other things developed. Then back in I won't try to recall dates, but sort of by the middle of the 18th century, there developed an interest in the designs of these cards, which up to that time were not particularly respectable, and with certainly not much high-class associations, and that mainly came about by the way of the imaginative, although very exciting book about the Tao by a French gentleman by the name of Kurt de Gabalis. Kurt de Gabalis had his own esoteric sources, whether they were in his own consciousness or from other sources, we don't know. But his contention was that the Tao originated in ancient Egypt. Now, the French were kind of interested in Egypt around that time, and that's why Napoleon took his troops over there and things of that sort. So there was the empire the empire style of furniture, of interior decorations, of ceilings, all kinds of things like that. They were usually black lacquer with gold decoration, the Empire style, which showed that relationship, that interest. Anyway, Culture Gabari had all kinds of interesting ideas, which for the most part, I think, may be regarded symbolically than otherwise. But he blandly came out with the fact that there were images in one of the ancient temples in Egypt, and that these images were the prototype of the Tarot. Later on, other people picked that up. Another person wrote a book called the Book of Thoth, Thoth being the Egyptian name for Hermes, and things like that. But it certainly called attention to this subject. That was the first one. By the latter part, the middle part of the 18th century, however, there came about the extremely well-informed and insightful and creative works of a gentleman who called himself Eliphas Levi, and whose writings, for the most part, really became one of the principal literary sources of the occult revival of the 19th century, bar none. Everyone, even the great Madame Blavatsky, had acknowledged that they were inspired by and copied a great deal of material on esoterica from Eliphas Levi, because Eliphas Levi died in the year 1875 when Madame Blavatsky and her associates founded the Theosophical Society. So there was no personal contact, but he was the great inspiration. And we're speaking of Freemasonry, which we just mentioned a while ago, General Albert Pike, whom Manly Hall called the Plato of Freemasonry. A greater compliment you cannot give to anybody. Was greatly inspired, and it took a great deal of material. You know, copyright laws did not exist in the 19th century. And so in Madame Blavatsky's writings, in some other writers' writings, there are paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs unaltered from Eliphas Levi. And they didn't have to ask anybody's permission. In any event, no, Eliphas Levi came up with something that became virtually normative in Tarot study, and that was the association of the Tarot with the mystical Jewish system of the Kabbalah. In Hebrew it would be pronounced Kabbalah. And what he did, what Eliphas Levi did, was he felt that the correspondences, both in numerological terms and even more so in philosophical terms, of the various portions of the Eschaim, of the Kabbalistic tree of life, and the Tarot deck, particularly the 22 cards of the major arcana of the Tarot, and the Hebrew letters, which in turn are attributed by Levi to the various portions of the tree, that these were of extremely great importance. And this became an interest and a preoccupation that became very, very far-flung, and that is still in many respects rules the roost. Now you may ask, well, maybe Eliphas Levi was describing something factual. You know, we always like to make things factual. And yet, I would suggest to you to think about an adage which I just coined, otherwise I would tell you. Namely, that when ideas are factualized, they are thereby reduced in import and sometimes even killed. Facts are the murder of truth. Now, you might say that's a very highfalutin statement, but on the other hand, why shouldn't it be made? The issue being that truth, of which Madame Blavatsky wrote her motto, for instance, that there is no religion higher than truth. That truth is something that arises within, that is born within the human soul. But you know, we don't trust our own soul. If we trusted our soul, really this world would be, I assure you, this world would be a heck of a nicer place to be. But we run after facts, and we run after opinions, and things of that sort, all of which are inferior to the deeper intuitions, the deeper revelation of symbolic truth that come forth from within ourselves. So that, therefore, let us say, there has been too much concretizing, too much factualizing of the Tao. But briefly, I'm sure that most of you are aware of that, there's no use talking about it too much, that the Eliphas Levi found correspondences. And these were mainly that the 22 paths of the tree of life of the Ephraim, which to each there is Kabbalistically, by the Kabbalist rabbis already, there is attributed a Hebrew letter beginning with Aleph and going all the way to the end, that these in turn show correspondences with the 22 cards of the major arcana, as it is called, of the Tao. And upon these correspondences, Levi based his symbolism. Now, where does the Tao come in? Well, because the Tao is really a curious deck of cards. It's composed of two decks combined. And they are referred to as the major arcana and the minor arcana, or the greater trumps and the major. Now there are 22 greater trumps. And then there are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and 22 channels or paths, as they are called, on the tree of life of the Kabbalah. And that was just a little bit too much for Eliphas Levi and some others to ascribe to a mere coincidence, and they said, there must be a common meaning. Now that's where the important things come in, when such meaning is discerned, and certainly Levi was a wonderful man, and a wonderfully insightful Kabbalistic scholar, and what, let's say, his idea is a great one and a very important one. The only thing that we need to keep in mind is that the system that originated with Eliphas Levi and then went on to others is not the only way of looking at the tarot. And once again, the important thing is not so much what system will fit into the situation, but what insights will arise within us as the result of contemplating these symbols. And that is, of course, of very great importance. Then other fine students came along. One of them was the great French occultist, the true leader and the revival of the French occult revival. He was the revival of he was one of the revivals of the occult in the occult revival, who went by the nom de plume, appropriately French term, of Papius. Papius, whose secular name was not nom de plume, was Dr. Gérard Encausse. He was a medical doctor, had done a tremendous amount of work in reviving in a very insightful and also very learned way the occult tradition. And among other things, he wrote a book on the tarot, which contains very fine information on tarot symbolism and which is entitled in its English translation as the Tarot of the Bohemians. Now let me voice something here that is very seldom voiced by anyone, although it's perfectly evident, that Papius did not write about the tarot in what became Czechoslovakia and now is Czechia, and the major province is Bohemia. Prague is the capital of Bohemia, in German called Böhmen. That's not the kind of Bohemians he was writing about. He was writing about gypsies, because the French name for gypsy is un bohemien. Why? Because people imagined that the gypsies who were wandering around, they were wandering around God knows how long, but they were wandering around and who everybody attributed their origins to a different place. And some people, including the French, felt that they came from Bohemia. And you're also familiar, no doubt, with the term of all sorts of freewheeling artistic people as being Bohemian in disposition. In fact, we have I wonder whether it still functions, we had a magnificent social club in San Francisco, the Bohemian Club, which in turn has the famous Bohemian Grove up along the river as you go north of San Francisco. And that was named the Bohemian Club by its, I think, also very early 20th century members, maybe even 19th century members, because they would encourage a freedom of living and a freedom of lifestyle, what passed for freedom at that time, and but there too the confusion arose as to whether we're talking about the land of Bohemia or being a Bohemian. In any event, Papius simply said the tarot of the gypsies in French, and people came along and they didn't want to translate the word for some reasons, they made it into Bohemians. Anyway, Papius also made a very cogent contribution to the tarot literature, which is worth reading. So let us say then, mainly inspired by Eliphas Levi and various people, including Papius, who studied the Elif studied the Tarot in a Kabbalistic fashion, gave the Tarot really quite a wide distribution and a wide interest. Now, I certainly don't have the time or the inclination here to go into a great deal of detail on this. But let's, from my point of view, let's be cognizant of at least the possibility, if not indeed the total veracity of the proposition that no matter through what lens the Tarot was viewed, observed, no matter through what the association, it's a difficult to pronounce good Victorian word. You know, the Tarot went through in various times. It always had, in my view, its principal effect, its principal impact by way of the stimuli that the viewing and the studying and the dealing with the Tarot cards had on the psyches of people. And that has been of great importance, and that is still of great importance today. And so we may be assured that among other uses, I would say that the greatest use of the Tarot was as a stimulus for the transcendentally toned imagination of the people who dealt with it. Now, I don't deny the fact that there always has been fortune-telling, because as the late Hollywood prophet, which maybe some of you who are as old as I, is anyone as old as I, as some may recall, was the recognition that how important the future's view is. And he was a television personality, his name was Criswell. And the problem, not the problem, the program was called Criswell Predicts. And one of his favorite sayings on television was, "We are all interested in the future because that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives." And then came the music, Criswell Predicts, you know. So we are all interested in the future. You can't deny that that is where we are going to spend the rest of our lives, one way or the other. But the interest in one's future, obviously, it's because it's an egotistical exercise, has been always very great. And there has always been, people always devised various modalities whereby they felt that they would get glimpses of the future to a greater or lesser extent. Now that brings us now to the both the shall we say the more refined and the less refined way of using the Tarot or some other modalities for what the more elegant word for it is divinatory purposes. Now where does the word divination come from? The word divination comes from ancient Rome, where the understanding of the invisible realities was of a Mediterranean polytheistic nature, and you know, the interior world image, shall we say, the image of the interior world of the ancient Romans, of the ancient Greeks, of the ancient Egyptians, has always included a vast number of beings that are ordinarily invisible to us, not just the gods that you can read about in Jupiter and Venus and so forth, or their equivalent in Greece, but many, many others. And also some minor deific entities, deific because they are not human, that live in realms that may have contact with humans, but that are not human. And deities were regarded as somewhat less than gods and goddesses. Now, it was the idea, the notion of the ancient Romans that the deities would manifest to humans who were desirous of such manifestation, and they would reveal various things to them that were not present in the human consciousness. And therefore, if people were responsive to the insight-producing promptings of the deities, now these are not the gods, but the deities, they could discover issues of life, and particularly of the future, that were not ordinarily available to humans. By the way, the term deity has in more recent times been adopted by the translators of Tibetan Buddhist scriptures, and they refer to certain category of spiritual beings as deities in English. They have their own Tibetan words. So this conviction that there are influences, forms of consciousness, entities around who are able and under certain circumstances willing to disclose their preternatural knowledge to humans. This has been inherited by people in the Christian era after ancient Rome had fallen and so forth. Somewhere here, it's really somewhat amusing, inherited from the Romans, we have these are some of the divinatory arts, which is on a higher class of fortune telling that the ancient Romans practiced, and many of these, to some degree, have been inherited later on by the people. Augury, which is divining by the flight of birds. Now, I always was puzzled at that. I mean, when I lived in the countryside as a child, and so there were a lot of birds, but other than some screeching and nesting activities, I couldn't see that they were revealing anything. Another one which is a little bit more disgusting, and that is the art of the haruspices, which is divining by the entrails of slaughtered animals. If you don't mind the pun, and I give it to you anyway, that type of divining takes guts. In any event, you know, that is one. Then there is something that is still around as crystal gazing, which in ancient English is called scrying. And then divining in water, hydromancy, geomancy, divination by way of dirt, the earth. One that was rather disreputable because of its nature, necromancy. Necromancy is divining by the dead. Now, how do you do that? Well, you conjure the dead. And I think the ancient Romans actually believed that they could bring dead bodies to life and then ask them questions, and apparently receive answers, which is always helpful when you ask a question. That's necromancy. And last, but certainly not least for our purposes, cartomancy, divining with cards. And so cards of various kinds, sometimes made out of pieces of wood, various other things with designs on them have been around. But as to how close the relationship to the Tao is difficult to tell. But now we need to take a look at the use of the Tao for the purpose of what is now called divination, which of course is using the Tao as an oracle, which originates in ancient ideas, and which has undoubtedly worked along with other oracles addressing themselves to the future. One has to be careful, and I have studied the Tao both in a divinatory sense and in a spiritual sense now for many years, that one has to be circumspect in one's intentions, in one's motivations, and the kind of consciousness whereby you approach the Tao. And as Krishna was right, we are all interested in the future. So a certain amount of inquiry into possible unknown circumstances, both in the present, in the future, and the use of the Tao for such purposes in a moderate fashion, I think is quite all right. Just because you want to find out something that may still be in the future, or even a present circumstance that is not clear to you. And if you consult in an intelligent and restrained fashion the Tao cards, you may get a certain amount of information. But you have to be careful not to overdo that, because any oracle, if it is overused by tradition, can turn on the oraculator, turn on the person who is consulting it. And why that is, I cannot tell you any more as to why you can receive valid direction and insight. But once again, keep in mind that the important thing in consulting an oracle is the person who is consulting the oracle. You are consulting. And therefore your state of mind, your intentions, your fears and your hopes, they are the ones that will influence the oracle. The oracle is not sovereign. It is a strange instrumentality which plays a part in disclosures of circumstances that otherwise might not be available to us. That is very important to keep in mind. Our time rushes along with us, so I cannot go into a great deal of detail. But let's say in modern death psychology, there have been a number of great discoveries, but one of them, which was really codified by C.G. Jung, is the one on synchronicity. Now, I can only sketch very, very briefly, but synchronicity simply means the meaningful coincidence of an interior commodity, an interior event in the psyche, and if an external physical occurrence at the same time. It is very much part of shamanistic and similar archaic spirituality, and which sort of indicates that when a truth rises, a useful insight is beginning to stir in the psyche, something can happen outside, which is not causally related with what is going on inside, but which can act as a confirming and verifying circumstance of our interior insight. And archaic people have a sense of that, a natural sense of that. But then after all, the poor dears, they don't have any computer, they don't have any television, they don't have all of these marvelous devices. If they wanted to find out something, they had to find out by such means, and they still do. This psychological circumstance may very well, again, I'm not dogmatizing about it, may very well be the operating procedure, the rationale of divination. So the divination, for the most part, is a contrived synchronicity. When you read the tarot cards according to, I don't know, the Celtic system, which is probably the most popular one or something like that, you are contriving a synchronicity. And the synchronicity is the meaning that you will derive from the way that the cards have constellated themselves. And if it is understood in that fashion, and once again handled with discretion and moderation, this is the big trouble. And because people are not discreet and are not moderate. Otherwise our world would be very different if they were. Also there is a good saying, a little bit in the nature of a pun, that all things about life, all things in moderation, including moderation. Moderate your moderation as well. But these are, so there has to be a restraint in the practice of divination. as well. And all of these vignettes that I am throwing out here about divination, about the tarot, and then of course, especially beginning with Eliphas Levi and continuing with Arthur Edward Waite and all kinds of people right now, our own fellow Californian, the late Dr. Paul Foster Case, and so forth. One of the really more inspiring and noble uses of the tarot, especially of the major arcana, the 22 major arcana or drum cards, has been not divination, and that's a side issue, but rather meditation. Now you might say, well, what do you mean meditation? You meditate, you don't look at anything, you close your eyes, you hum Om or something like that, and you're not engaged with anything external. This is not true. It has always been known. It is known in the Catholic and in the Orthodox Church today that there is what ecclesiastically is called interior prayer. The interior prayer is a word form of meditation. And the meditations that are facilitated by way of the tarot is by looking at, contemplating, allowing the meaning, especially of the major arcana, to enter our consciousness. And for this purpose, it's quite valid to study the symbolism that is Kabbalistic and otherwise represented in the cards. But once again, don't go simply by the symbolism, but also pay attention to what it feels like. So I have not done that, but I have known numerous people who, somewhat instigated by myself also, would do this as an exercise for maybe a period of time, or longer or shorter, that every day they would take the tarot deck and they would shuffle it and then pull a card. And then they use that card to meditate on that day. And the results that they obtained were, for the most part, very satisfactory. And then, particularly the major arcana carry high spiritual meaning, high spiritual stimulus. The minor arcana less so. In fact, there have been several works, one of them by our fellow Californian teacher, Dr. Paul Foster Case, very, very fine gentleman, and others, that devised little meditation texts to go with the major arcana symbolism. And if I may engage in a little bit of self-promotion, I'm one of them too. And I have a little book, and there will be some of them available, which is now it has been in print since 1975. So it kind of indicates that there was a reasonably good readership, and it has the 22 greater trumps, has the introduction of them, and underneath them a meditation text, which I felt was a very good expression of the spiritual keynote of that card. Now, I could regale you with stories of a more personal nature, but I think it would probably detract from our subject matter. But the thing is, when I wrote that, I was a fairly recent but very enthusiastic student of the tarot, having been introduced to it to one of my now unhappily departed young friends who was a very good Kabbalist. And so I decided to do this. A sort of exercise. And I said, oh well, 22 cards, 22 meditation, I can knock that out in a few days. Oh, it took me 22 days. When I got into one particular card and meditated on it and wrote a text, I couldn't do anything else that day, but well, I could cook dinner, I could people pay my phone bill, but anything like that. But it was really that was the exercise that convinced me that these cards are capable of bringing forth responses from our psyche that few other people can. And it wouldn't serve any purpose to go into details, but the events, external events that came about in my life, in my household, in my daily life, were incredibly meaningful, and they always related to the symbolism of the card that I was working on that day. Now, I can't promise you that you can all do that, because I think I was just particularly well guided at that. But it really convinced me that these cards can do something. Now, as our time moves along with us, I have already taken a little longer, I think, than is allocated, but I add a few more minutes, because there is a central consideration that certainly I kind of see Mr. Hall's face nodding. Yes, you have to say that. You see, I was channeling. Yeah, but and that is really this. That the source of insight, the source of wisdom, of goodness, of truth, of all the good things is right here. If it's not here, as the one Hindu school said it, if it is not here, no, if it is here, it is everywhere. If it is not here, it is nowhere. And so, but we are an extroverted culture. We think, oh, that it's all out there, it's in the computer screen, it's in this, that, and the other thing. No. To the extent that external things, including a deck of cards, which is external to ourselves, is useful to us and can do great and wonderful things, is because of the source of insight and foresight and wisdom that is within us. But we can stimulate synchronicity. Let's see whether such an external deed as putting out some cards in a certain way can become a source of insight stimulus. But you've got to remember that the first and last most important person in this world is you. Why? Because in you is the source of insight, in you is the source of wisdom, is the source of goodness. Certainly not the external shell, but that. And synchronistic events, whether contrived with a deck of cards or not, or so forth, are ways in order to stimulate that insight. Now, once we say, oh my goodness, what little flock of birds? How can you divine by way of a flock of birds? Well, let me tell you that Madame and I were in Rome and we came from Tivoli, where we stayed on the little train down into the big railroad station. Then we got out of the railroad station, I looked up in the sky, I said, what is this? There were huge flocks of birds which were flying around in definitely geometrical and artistic patterns. They were making eights, they were making double eights, they were doing this and that, and I said, aha, now for the first time in my life, I have an idea as to what augury was like. Because there are evocative patterns that will arrive in nature, whether it's with geomancy in the earth or with hydromancy with the water or something like that. Things happen there that grab you, and by grabbing you bring something forth. And this, of course, is the application, one of the many applications of a very important principle of earthly life. And that is that in spite of all of our faults, as the fundamentalists would say it, in spite of the fact that we are miserable sinners, well, now, you know, it's the sinners we might be, but don't be miserable about it. but let's say, in spite of our deficiencies and difficulties, within us lie fabulous potentials. And these fabulous potentials can be stimulated, brought forth to our and to general benefit by various means. On the basis of my long-time exposure to the Tarot and writing that little book and things of that sort, you know, I am convinced that Tarot is one of the instrumentalities that can act as such a helpful stimulus for the forthcoming in a helpful manner of our own interior potential. It definitely can. I have seen it happen, and let's say there are always various sides to these matters. But when I would say as a little advice to, if you do Tarot divination, if it indicates something in the future for someone or for yourself, try to follow it. The fact that it revealed itself to you indicates that it's important. And if you don't follow the directions of the Tarot, you may regret it considerably later. I have. I know how that works. But in any event, it is one of the numerous potential stimulators of the revelation of consciousness. It is something that can bring something forth from you. And therefore, if you do Tarot divining, don't make it too material. Don't make it too factual. The more you factualize, the more you materialize, the more you trivialize and you chase away the real meaning. Why? Because the purpose of this life, as stimulated by various devices, is not to have material results, material good fortune, but it is to get closer to that wonder, that immensity, that tremendousness that is deeply hidden within you, but which may not remain so hidden if you use various devices to bring it forth. And when that happens, well, obviously you will have glimpses of the future, but also all kinds of other glimpses, you know, because there is a realm of being, and if I may, with my 91 years, look back at a long life, from experience I can testify to it, that what I'm telling you is my experience and therefore true to me, that these devices can bring forth something from a realm where the things that divide our perception here are not valid. That is why something like the tarot or divinatory methods can cut into the future, but they can also cut into the distant past. They can do all kinds of other things. And so I am reminded of words, if I recollect them correctly, from a sonnet by Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, where he refers to that realm, as he calls it. There, past, present, future shoot, triple blossoms from one root. Substances at base divided, in their summits are united, and the holy essence rolls on through separated souls. Then it goes on from there. So there are ways in which these realms can be entered, which are timeless, which are transcendental because they transcend our limitations. And isn't it really true that when all is said and done, when all the accounts have been computed, to come to that realm and to partake of it, and to be inspired by it, and guided by it, in this world and in all the worlds to come, that is the purpose of our existence. That is the sort of thing that people like Manly Palmer Hall, H.P. Blavatsky, various other wise men and women have been devoted to, and which we should be devoted to. Because of this is one other thing that I can and will really assure you of. If you do that, you will not regret it. Not now, not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow. It will be a great and marvelous gift to you, and it can come from the tarot, and it can come from the Knapp-Hall deck, which individually we did not discuss, but which is a unique deck, and once again, I would, if we address it at an intuitive level and see what it does to us, then its purpose will be certainly fulfilled. So I thank you so very, very much for having come, and if you at some time you want to take a look at my little book, I have to tell Kelly what to charge for it, because I will give you an author's discount. But in any event, I'm so glad that you could come. I'm always moved. I'm moved near to tears when I'm in this hall, and when I see the seats full of people, just like they were years ago, when we had all those really good, wonderful times here. And those times can come back, but we have to bring them back. So let's do so.